go for two. Direct snap to Ellington. Hopkins
throws to Boyd. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 21 of the Nachos and Analysis College Football Show. I'm Drew Archer, and as always, I'm joined by Matthew Johnson. How's it going, Matthew?
It's good over here. The college football season is over, and this is our final episode of the season, so it might be a little bit a longer one, but I think it's going to be a really fun one.
That we've come to that unfortunate part of the calendar where there is no more college football until August.
And only one more week of NFL football, which is kind of weird to say since this is the first 12-team playoff, and we had college football all the way until January 20th.
Yep. So two more weeks of football, and then on to college baseball, at least for me.
Good luck with that this season. Are you going to bring the Ball Talk podcast back?
Thinking about making some changes or do shorter, quicker episodes. I got to finalize that.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll keep the listeners updated on Twitter. You can follow us there. But with that, we can get into the final college football game of the season. Ohio State taking down Notre Dame 34-23 in Atlanta Monday night. Drew, you get a chance to watch it?
Unfortunately, I did, and it kind of went about the way I thought it was going to. I was hopeful that Notre Dame would find some magic, and right before the game started, I went into my gambling account, and I was like, no, Ohio State's covering this spread, so Notre Dame never had a chance.
I feel like they did have a little bit of a chance. Like in the second half, they kind of started making a comeback, and they got a couple key turnovers too. But other than that, it did seem like Ohio State was in control of it from the get-go.
Yeah.
But yeah, not to take away anything from Notre Dame's season. They still had a really impressive run, and they didn't go down without a fight. But was Riley Leonard enrolled in college in 2020 where he has a COVID year and could possibly come for a fifth year?
That I'm not sure about.
I tried to look for news on it, but I couldn't see anything of whether he was going to the draft or not, so that would be interesting. I know at least Ohio State had a lot of like fourth and fifth year guys on their defense, and they're going to have to rebuild that in the offseason, but they should have a lot of money left over to do it, and it's always nice to keep Jeremiah Smith around on the offensive side.
They basically bought this championship. It was a good investment because it worked out. You look at the national championship, that was Notre Dame's second loss, Ohio State with 2 losses. And what seed was Ohio State? Were they a number 7 seed?
I think Ohio State was 7 and Notre Dame was 8, or it was flip-flopped.
So you got 2 lower seeds, 2 lost seeds finishing up the season there. So I'm a big fan of the 12-team playoff. I like the way that it shook out this year. Yes, there were some blowouts, but that happened in the 4-team playoffs.
I agree, and I'll have more to say about that, I think, in a later segment as we get down here. But I thought it was a good game, and Travis Scott, like, live performance music video thing was kind of cool, too, at halftime.
Yeah, and am I totally wrong? I thought Lil Wayne was supposed to perform at halftime.
I'm not sure. I know there was a bunch of talk about, like, Lil Wayne doing the Super Bowl because it's in New Orleans, and he was, like, kind of pissy about Kendrick getting it instead, but I might have heard that too. I'm not sure.
I feel like I remember him being upset that he didn't get the Super Bowl, and then I thought like shortly thereafter it was announced that he was doing the national championship, and you mentioned Kendrick Lamar. He did get a little shout out in one of Kendrick Lamar's new songs.
Oh yeah, that's a good album. Everybody should go listen to it.
I know when I first listened to it, I told you, I was like, it was a good album, but I don't know that I could listen to it a lot. And I've been listening to it pretty frequently, actually. So.
I listen to it like almost every day, and it's been out for like 2 months at this point.
So that's our hip-hop talk of the episode.
We're trying new things in the last episode.
Yeah, mixing it up. But one thing we're not mixing it up with is Pump Monkey Septic Service, our loyal sponsor for the last 2 years. Alan Powell and the folks at Pump Monkey take care of their customers, do a great job. He's a Clemson alumni, still lives in the community of Clemson and services the upstate of South Carolina. So if you need your septic tank changed, pumped, whatever, give him a call at 864-710-2211. The holiday season has just passed. You've had a lot of people in your house. You've had a lot of food. A lot of stuff going down your drains. Give them a call for a free estimate to check out your septic tank at 864-710-2211. When the dump's funky, call Pump Monkey.
Finishing up with the national championship talk, we're kind of going to jump into a season review and kind of an overview of Clemson's 2024 campaign. First off, Clemson made its way back to the playoffs for the first time since 2020 this year. They were eliminated in the first round, but making the playoffs for the first time in 4 years was a promising change. And I know we kind of talked about it. I feel like they almost stumbled into that position, but still like a good accomplishment nonetheless.
It was nice to be back into that postseason feel, because I mean, we got spoiled for what was it, those 5 consecutive years where we were in the playoff every single year.
Maybe 6.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact number. I remember talking to my mom a couple weeks back when they were still doing that Tuesday college football playoff ranking show. Clemson was always in the mix. I would sit down and watch that every Tuesday night. I haven't watched that in years as a result. So it was nice for Clemson to get back in there, even if it was at a lower seed. I think you saw a lot of promise with some of the young offensive weapons in that game. Obviously, we know how the defense performed and what happened as a result of it, but postseason play is always really nice. Speaking of postseason play, Tigers get another Clemson championship. The Tigers win the ACC championship this past season against SMU in thrilling fashion. The Tigers won that one 34-31 with a last-second 56-yard field goal. Got the chance to go cover that game. And Bank of America Stadium lets the media go down on the field for the last 5 minutes. So I got a good camera angle of that kick, and it was a cool moment to be down there. And I don't know if you saw on Twitter, but Hoosier dropped a hat that he's selling for NIL money on Twitter. The camera angle right before he kicked the field goal, he winked. I don't know if you've seen those style of hats where words are written upside down. He's got like a wink hat that he's selling. It looks pretty cool. I think I'm going to add to my shopping cart.
That's pretty cool. I like when NIL is current with the, plays and what their players are known for, kind of building on your brand. Like, that is pretty cool. But as you mentioned with the Texas loss in the playoff, a big part of that was the defense, and resulting in that, Clemson went ahead and fired Wes Goodwin, the savant, in quotations. I'm sorry. That was mean. Clemson did make the change and officially announced. We were speculating. It was kind of still up in the air with our last episode, but it's official that Tom Allen, the defensive coordinator from Penn State this past season, will be the new defensive coordinator at Clemson.
I'm a big fan of this hire. Admittedly, last week I mentioned I don't know a whole lot about him. I've learned a little bit more about him through the great coverage of Tiger Illustrated this past week, but it seems like a no-brainer. He has children that live here in the Southeast. I think one of his daughters is about to have a baby. His wife wanted to be close with family then. He's a big faith-based man like Dabo, and it just seems like they're going to gel well. And something that he has that Wes Goodwin did not have. Seems like he brings a little bit of intensity. In his introductory press conference, he was hoarse. I think we're going to like what we see. He made that comment about Wes Goodwin. The most fiery thing I think we heard out of him was like literally at the very beginning of his tenure when he had that no risk it, no biscuit comment. I hadn't seen anything that gave off that vibe from him since then.
I don't know. The no risk it, no biscuit slogan was a little corny or cheesy, and he did kind of carry that throughout the rest of his career here.
A couple other things we want to touch on. Freshman standouts. 4 Clemson freshmen were ranked among the top 25 true freshmen of the 2024 season, according to College Football Network. Sammy Brown, freshman linebacker, came in at number 9 on the list. He was a big part of this defense, and to Wes Goodwin's not credit, in big moments like South Carolina, you pull this leading tackler out of the game. Ashton Hampton, another guy on the defensive side of the ball, came in at 21 on that list. He's our freshman standout cornerback, had a couple big plays this season. And then everybody knows about Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore coming in at 23 and 25. I think the future's bright for those two. You got Cade Klubnik coming back for his senior season next year. You've seen him progress in his time at Clemson. He obviously has a connection with these guys, and I think the offense is going to put up big numbers with those 3 next year.
Definitely. But I did want to mention what you said about Ashton Hampton having a couple big plays this year might be a bit of a down play, because I saw that he only allowed 2 catches or so throughout the entire season and no touchdowns as a true freshman playing man corner pretty much all the time. It's a really big season for Ashton Hampton, and we'll talk about him later down the line, I'm sure. Another big storyline with this year was there were a lot of ups and downs. Of course, you start the season with the 34-3 loss to Georgia. Although it was pretty bad, your offense didn't score at all. You kind of get dominated. you hung in that game for a half, and you showed some flashes here and there. You just needed the execution to be a bit better, but you then had that narrow 17-14 defeat against South Carolina. In between those, you had 6 games in a row that you won between the UGA and Louisville games. The Louisville one, another kind of down point in the season where just kind of a shocking game to lose and drop in the middle of the season when you're seemingly pretty hot. But then you also end that season with the ACC Championship playoff berth. Just a really roller coaster season. Kind of leaves it up in the air of what to expect coming into the next year.
You mentioned that Louisville game. I try to block that from my memory. That is one of the worst experiences I've ever had in Death Valley. That game was just absolutely pathetic. It sucks to open up the season in the way that you did against Georgia. There were a lot of things that you could look at from that game, especially in the first half, of bright spots, and you knew that Clemson was going to be able to execute against teams not filled with talent quite like Georgia. But that Louisville game was the lowest point of the season for me. And then I touched on it a minute ago, quarterback Cade Klubnik coming back for his senior season. Despite a playoff loss, he delivered a dominant 2024 season, improving exponentially, showing promise for the future. Personally, I have high expectations for him next year, especially with the weapons that I touched on, a receiver that he's got coming back. I'm looking forward to this offense. It seems like Garrett Riley got the talent in there that you were missing at the wide receiver position for a few years. So big season loading, I think, for Cade Klubnik.
Yeah, and a big part of that season, which kind of leads us into the next segment. Me and Drew are each going to give out our favorite game, and my favorite game Cade played a big part in. 24-20 victory at Pittsburgh. Definitely not one of the games that came with like no anxiety, kind of like the App State or Stanford game, but Clemson's resolve, Clemson's determination to finish, come back from being down in that game, and not to mention the Cade Klubnik 50-yard go-ahead touchdown with just a minute 16 left on the clock. Incredible play, just great fight from the team. It was stressful the whole way, but it was really nice to see that the team still had it after that Louisville loss.
When Clemson went down there, before they had the opportunity on that final possession, I had already written it off as a loss. I started just mentally preparing myself, and then next thing you know, Cade breaks that 50-yard touchdown run. I've kind of already touched on my favorite game of the season. It was that ACC championship game. After a dominant first half offensively, offense kind of slowed down a little bit in the second quarter, but defense kept SMU in check there, and then the second half was a completely different story. Tigers let SMU back in. The heroics there of Hoosier, which was set up by Adam Randall kickoff return, seeing him potentially in the running back room next year, guy that came in with tons of hype, hadn't really been able to stay healthy, got passed by these young freshmen in the lineup, and it's good to see him have some breakout moments, and that return set up that game-winning touchdown.
Absolutely. Speaking of special plays, my favorite play from the season, Ashton Hampton, that game against Virginia Tech. He was playing one-on-one with this receiver down the sideline, got beat for like a 25-yard gain the play before. One of his only, receptions given up all year, really. The very next play, they try to exploit the same matchup. Ashton Hampton makes an incredible one-handed interception to get Clemson the defensive stand in the red zone there. That's my favorite play for the Clemson season.
You and I were kind of on the same page with a lot of these because I was originally also going to pick that. When I went to go type that into my notes, I saw that you had already had that one, and that was a cool experience because I always wanted to go to Virginia Tech, and me and my parents went to that game, so got to see that one in person. So what I ended up changing it to ended up being what you just discussed as your favorite game, 50-yard run by Cade Klubnik there. Like I said, I'd written that off, and he breaks that one loose. Give the Tigers a little bit of boost, especially after a tough loss to a team like Louisville. Was that the week prior?
No, it was 2 weeks after. Clemson lost to Louisville, then beat Virginia Tech, and then beat Pitt.
Gotcha, okay. Oh, yeah, because I remember driving up to Blacksburg after that Louisville game. I'm like, if we drive all this way and they lose and it's just cold and miserable, I'm going to be mad.
Yeah, that was one of the Clemson defense's best performances. So I'll just let you have that one-handed interception as your favorite play if you want it because you were there for it. So I feel like you deserve it. My honorable mention, if I had to pick another, the Nolan Hauser 56-yard field goal to win the ACC championship game. Nothing like it in ACC championship history. Nothing like it in Clemson history. Just amazing from a true freshman kicker. College kickers, what do they do usually is miss, and he didn't miss that time. He sealed it with the wink too. So that's my honorable mention there.
If you're going to give out an honorable mention, I'm going to give out an honorable mention, and it's not necessarily one specific play. It's a series of plays. The physicality that Phil Maffa ran with against Wake Forest, the number of dudes that he just put his shoulder down and ran through on the road at Wake Forest, that was a fun game to watch too. And unfortunately, he was battling injuries there towards the end. We didn't get a chance to see that Phil Maffa for the full season. That was a fun game to watch him in the backfield.
Fact or fiction?
Fact or fiction. The expanded 12-team college football playoff format has diminished the importance of regular season games. Both the national championship teams had poor regular season losses, especially that Notre Dame loss to NIU early in the year. Ohio State to their rival, the final regular season game of the year, and neither played for a conference championship.
I think this is a fact, but only to a certain extent. You had the NIU loss for Notre Dame in week 2, which was really bad. Michigan finished with like 6 wins, but one of them was to Ohio State in a pretty dominating fashion in the last week of the regular season. But I think the 12-team playoff did have the best 12 teams in there, and in turn, that led to the number 7 and 8 seed playing for a national championship, which if you said to that somebody like, 10 to 15 years ago that was possible, they would think you were crazy. But I think it's awesome for the sport. And even if you have one bad loss, you're still in it as long as you're beating the right teams at the right time. And Ohio State was really putting it together at the right time.
To that point, going into this playoff, I had no read on it. I had no idea who would win the national championship. I mean, obviously, I picked Ohio State as my preseason pick, but that was just a guess. I'm going to say fiction here. I don't think it diminishes the regular season. I think this was a weird year. We've talked about it. There was a lot of parity in college football this year. I don't think that there was really a dominant football team throughout the regular season. Just coincidentally enough, you had a lot of teams that were really, really good. Then they got caught up in a tough game, picked up a loss, and just coincidentally kind of happened this way. So I'm going to say fiction. I think the regular season still is important. I just think this year was a weird year, and I enjoyed this college football season. Fact or fiction, the Chicago Bears hiring of Ben Johnson as head coach will revitalize their offensive strategy.
I'm saying fact here. I know this is a little different for us as a college football show, but college football is over. We got some NFL still happening and NFL news happening, so that's why we threw this one in here. But I'm saying fact. I hope that Ben Johnson does like a Kevin O'Connell, the head coach of the Vikings. He also calls the offensive plays for the Vikings. I hope Ben Johnson does that because he's a pretty good offensive mind. If you watch any bit of the Lions this year, just really fun to watch their offense work. So I hope he continues that in Chicago. Hopefully it can revitalize Caleb Williams to some extent. Really sad how the Lions season ended, though.
They were a team I was rooting for. I like Coach Campbell. They went out in the worst of ways this past weekend. I'm going to go, in fact, it does revitalize their offensive strategy. I will say with this caveat that the Chicago Bears are just a troubled organization. I listen to Pardon My Take all the time. Big Cat, a huge Chicago Bears fan, and he's just miserable. They just continue to get every decision wrong when it comes to drafts and any kind of organizational decision. So I don't see any of that changing, but I do wish Ben Johnson, a South Carolina native, all the best of luck in Chicago. Fact or fiction, Clemson's return to the college football playoff marks the beginning of a new dynasty under Dabo Swinney.
This might be controversial, but I'm going to say fiction. I'm a little worried going into next season. Like I said earlier, we were a bit lucky to end the season, had some disappointing losses, UGA, South Carolina specifically. The recruiting this year wasn't amazing, although you do have some good returning pieces coming up back like Cade Klubnik, TJ Moore. So I think we'll just have to see. I think this one was a little bit of luck on Clemson's part.
I'm going to preface by saying to be determined. I like the changes that Dabo's making. You got 3 guys coming in from the transfer portal. There's a lot of NIL money being thrown around. The new NCAA ruling where the universities themselves are going to be able to pay players, I think up to $20 or $22 million this first year. Clemson is investing in its football program. You can call Dabo stubborn and prideful at times, but I think he hates losing more than that. So I think he will do anything he can to win. and get back on top. So I'm going to say fact. I think this is going to be a new dynasty under Dabo Swinney. Are we going to see Clemson go to 3 national championships in 4 years? Maybe not, but I like where Clemson is positioned in the conference, and I like our chances.
Weekly picks.
All right, time to wrap up season 3 of our Pick'em contest. Season 1 went to Matthew. I had to throw on I don't even remember what it said on.
Clem sucks, I think.
Clem sucks, that's right. Donated by our friend Chris Phillips over at SEC Unfiltered. Had to wear that to the Clemson and Carolina baseball game into the Cajun Cafe. The last 2 years, I have taken the lead. So the way it shakes out this year, I ended the season with 56 total points, 48 from our weekly picks, 8 from my preseason picks. Matthew finished the season with 51, 44 of which he got on our weekly picks, and 7 from his preseason picks. How we feeling? We're going to get a tattoo and shut a bar down in the same days as like a double punishment?
I think so. I think I would like to just knock it all out, and we're going to schedule it coming up soon, so some off-season content probably coming to you guys soon. I didn't have a chance going into this national championship, but at least I finished with getting both of my picks right. Drew, as he mentioned, picked Ohio State as his preseason pick. I picked him just as a little pat on the back that I could get 1 point while he gets his 2. And then the over hit 2, which Drew also got. So I didn't really gain any ground, but I at least, won 100%, I can say.
That over was a no-brainer there pretty early in the game. I meant to go back this week and do the math on what our percentage is, but you and I, we've done pretty well with our weekly picks.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're right around 50%. You're probably a little above, and I think we each were around 50% for all of our preseason picks too. So we got the crystal ball. Maybe that'll be our thumbnail for next year, like the crystal ball predictions.
I think to be profitable in gambling against the spread in college football, I think you just have to be 54% or so. So we're right there. We're pretty close. You want to win some money. Maybe follow our picks next year.
At least just give our opinions some credence.
Yeah. You want to do some way too early expectations for Clemson in 2025?
Yeah, I think this was one of our better performing YouTube videos, so I'm excited to bring it back this year. The official schedule is not out, but the teams of the conference schedule and the out-of-conference schedule dates are already announced, just not the dates for the conference games. So Clemson's going to open the season at home versus LSU, follow that up at home versus Troy. Later in the season, the week before the South Carolina game, you have Furman coming to town and ending the season at South Carolina November 29th. Conference opponents this year, you got to play at Boston College versus Duke at home, Florida State at home, SMU at home too, Syracuse at home also, which is nice, but you do have to travel to Georgia Tech, Louisville, and North Carolina, which are all teams that are kind of on the rise. North Carolina, new coach. Georgia Tech getting a good amount of transfers in. Louisville beat us last year, so really tough there. Any thoughts on the schedule, Drew?
I don't know. I kind of like the schedule. You mentioned how Georgia Tech's had some improvements both on the field and with how they're recruiting and using NIL. I've never been to a game in Atlanta. I'd imagine with Belichick being in North Carolina, those might be high-dollar tickets. I would love to go to Chapel Hill for that game and love to try to go to Georgia Tech this season. I love opening the season against LSU. I think the next 2 years are going to be pretty cool hosting LSU, and I'm also going to try to go to Baton Rouge next year. So another big-time game to open up the season. I think that'll go a little bit better for the Tigers, or the Clemson Tigers, this year than their opening game against Georgia this past season.
Do you have a record prediction based off of that? I know it really is hard to do now because we don't have the dates in order, but any predictions on that front?
I think that Clemson goes 10-2. My notes, I have 3 teams listed out that could be a toss-up for Clemson. I'm going to add a 4th in there. I think Tigers split this 4-game stretch between LSU, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia Tech. The UNC is just the Bill Belichick factor. We talked about how Georgia Tech is doing recruiting-wise. So I think if you can go 2-2 in those 4 games, Clemson wins the rest of them. So I got Tigers going 10-2. Potentially, based on those teams I throw out, go undefeated and win your conference championship if your only 2 losses are to South Carolina and LSU.
Yeah, that would be a pretty ideal scenario for Clemson there. And Like I said, it all depends on how the schedule lines up, what games you're playing after one another. Not feeling super confident about how this out-of-conference and conference schedule looks. So my record prediction is going to be 8-4. I'm going to go low this year. Like I said, you have the super tough out-of-conference with LSU, who had a pretty decent season this past year. They were nothing great, but South Carolina ended the season on like 7 or 8 straight wins. They didn't win their bowl game though, but Lenora Sellers is sure to come back with a vengeance, and he had a really good game in Clemson last year. It'll be tough to travel to Williams-Brice to end the season next year. So I think the games, you mentioned a couple of them, but LSU, South Carolina, SMU, Georgia Tech, Louisville, and UNC. Depending on how the schedule shakes up, if you're doing like a couple road games in a row, it's possible you could go 1-5 or 2-4 in that stretch, just depending on how it shakes out. So I started looking into a little bit of the recruiting class, kind of to follow up with the season. And shout out to a friend of the show, Jason Priester. I was reading a lot of his articles on the Clemson Insider, so that's where a lot of my information is coming from. But Clemson's 2025 recruiting class started really strong. They were in the top 10, but they had a lot of decommitments, like 4-star defensive end, 4-star defensive lineman. They still have 1 5-star defensive tackle, but still losing 2 4-star guys in decommitments is not great. Also had a couple 4-stars decommit in the secondary and added just a 3-star to replace them. Had a quarterback, a 4-star, flipped to Notre Dame, only replaced him with a 3-star. Still have some talent coming in, like 1 5-star with Amari Adams, the defensive lineman, but to have all those decommitments, it's kind of a bad sign for the future for Clemson if you're not able to continue to get high-profile recruits and build your class. Although Clemson is, starting to add transfer portal, it's still tough to only have a class of like 15. And I think I mentioned that they were in the top 10 early in this recruiting class rankings, but with all the decommitments, I don't think they're in the top 25 in any rankings. There could be more commits coming in, before the signing period is over, but just that in itself is a little worrying for me. I know you don't really pay attention to recruiting either, but any thoughts on that?
One thing I will say about the recruiting class size, starting this year, they're eliminating walk-ons, and then you had so many guys make decisions to come back. So those two factors kind of affected the size of this recruiting class. Like you said, I don't pay attention to recruiting. I don't get my hopes up for the decision of a 17, 18-year-olds. I just wait for somebody to tell me they're coming, and then I look more into them. So I know people really get into recruiting, not really my thing, but where Clemson's falling in the rankings, I guess, with these classes, it could be concerning if it doesn't kind of change. I think Matt Luke is doing a great job recruiting. I think our new defensive coordinator, Coach Allen, I've seen tons and tons of pictures of all these coaches out on the recruiting trail. You got Ben Boulware out there. Offensive and defensive coordinator are not going out and recruiting, and instead you have quarterbacks coach Taj Boyd and linebackers coach Ben Boulware out on the road doing your recruiting for you. So I'd imagine Garrett Riley and Tom Allen obviously going to still be heavily involved with those positions, especially just because that's naturally what they've coached. The bright spot is what 2 better guys to send out and pitch Clemson than Taj Boyd and Ben Boulware out to high school players.
Taj Boyd was probably a 4-star, I think, but he had to sit behind a couple quarterbacks before he got his shot at Clemson and help Clemson get to that national prominence and set the stage for your Trevor Lawrences and Deshaun Watson. So, and Ben Boulware, I think he was probably only a 2 or 3-star local kid, and he came in and was like defensive MVP of a national championship game, which is wild. So that's really good for them. It's interesting that not have your defensive coordinator out there, and I wonder, just because Clemson's defense was performing a little poorly, and you also had a couple young stars kind of starting to play prominent roles in your defense, if that led to a couple of these decommitments, like if they're looking forward that I'm not going to get to start, that might have something to do with it too, yeah.
Back in Alabama's dominance, like Coach Saban was able to just stockpile talent. But now in the world of NIL, if I'm a 5-star guy and I'm not in a starting role, some Big Ten school can pay me to transfer and I can start right away. I think you're going to see a lot more balancing of talent across the country, and that could play a big part in it as well.
Yeah, for sure. And even though you have that mixed bag of recruiting. You still have Blake Miller, Tristan Lee, Cade, Antonio Williams, all coming back, which is a big thing. And you have those transfers in. Where we haven't mentioned yet that DeMonte Capehart is applying for a 6th year of eligibility. Has until February 6th for that decision to be final from the NCAA and for him to declare for the draft. So possible you get him back too on the defensive line, which would be huge. I'm sorry to end our season 3 on kind of a grim note, but I just feel like it's okay to be cautious because, there's signs in everything, and everything kind of leads to another thing. So not necessarily to be a doomer, but I don't know. It looks like it's going to be tough if Clemson is going to succeed.
Well, the nice thing is we're kind of balanced. I'm a little more optimistic about next season. You're a little down on them. One of us is bound to be right. Hopefully I am. Not necessarily for pride, but for Clemson's success. A big factor in it is going to be how Clemson adjusts and improves on the defensive side based on the way that the offense looked with the people you have coming in, the people you have returning. I'm looking forward to what this offense is going to be able to do next season. If this defense improves 50% from what they were the last time we saw them in that game against Texas, Clemson could have a good season next year. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Yeah, and I too hope you're right. Really want to beat South Carolina so they don't start a new streak on us and keep that hype down in Columbia.
Shane Beamer might be building something in there. I can't deal with losing to them all that frequently. So the nice stat that we can throw out here is I think it was 3 consecutive seasons the visiting team has won that game, maybe 4 seasons, I can't remember. But thank you to our listeners for joining us all season long. Ball Talk Podcast. I've done it the last 2 seasons covering baseball and softball. Going to do it in some form or fashion. Might not be quite as lengthy as I typically do because keeping up with 4 baseball games and 4 softball games to update and review every week is pretty daggum time consuming. So I personally am looking forward to baseball. That's the nice thing about this 12-team playoff. The distance between the last college football game and the start of college baseball is less than a month away. So Valentine's Day, Tigers head out to Texas. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, it should be a good spring in the upstate and some good content coming from us. The podcast might be a little different format next time you see us. Who knows? Maybe this is the last time you'll ever see us. I'm just kidding. But it was a great season. Thank you to Drew for everything you did for this podcast this season, all the notes and, recording malfunctions that we went through. So
a lot were on me this year.
Yeah, a lot of it was me. So I think so.
It's been an up and down year for us just to get these podcasts recorded and out there. And shout out to you for doing the editing because I edit all the Ball Talk stuff myself and absolutely hate it. So I appreciate you you taking that on the last 2 years.
Yeah, we were dealing with natural disasters and inclement weather all year. It seemed like sicknesses, travel, but we made it through 21 episodes in the books. Thank you to all the listeners who listened. We had... I think our YouTube analytics is we had somewhere around 1,000 unique new viewers, returning viewers coming back. So that was very good growth for us this year, and excited for the future of Nachos and Analysis.
Absolutely. And so I guess we sign off for the final time. It was a fun, exciting season, first year of the 12-team playoff. And be on the lookout next August for more college football content. Peace.
Also, I'm going to put this at the end of the episode after the credits, but I wore a different hat in every episode this season, except for the one that I missed, and I just recorded a video for myself and input it into the podcast. I accidentally wore the same one, but it was bad travel situations going on then, so different hat every episode.
I'm pretty sure I probably wore this hat about 75% of the episodes this season.
Which I didn't even realize, but in one of our most recent episodes, you wore that, and I wore a pink Carhartt hat the same day. I didn't even notice it while editing, and then I just kind of threw it on to play through and check it, and I was like, oh, we're wearing almost the same hat. And then I think my sister Elizabeth commented on that video and was like, oh, I love the matching hats this time.